So this week's show, I've been a guest on Michael's show. It was an eye-opening experience for me, and after learning more and more about what he does, and honestly, mold is the number one topic on just about everybody's mind these days. Just about every new client I'm getting is asking about it, whether it's because they're suffering from the effects of a mold exposure or because they know somebody who is, and they just don't want to go there. And so, it's very important that we have a meaningful discussion about this, and we have experts talking about it. I myself am I'm comfortable talking about mold. I certainly can help in new construction, designing and building a home to avoid, alleviate the potential of mold. But when it comes to discussing the fine details of it, I think there's nobody else to talk about this than Michael. So without any further delay, let me bring in Michael Rubino. Michael, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And thank goodness my audio issues have been solved. So this sounds great.
It's really funny as you're talking about these audio issues and I'm hearing you. I'm just laughing to myself because how many times have I had audio issues where, you have the best technology you could afford to buy and it just doesn't work, right? And so I've been there, man.
Yeah, and it's everybody now throughout COVID, we're all used to doing Zoom calls and team meetings and all that stuff. I'll tell you what, technology is fantastic when it works.
Yeah, when it works, keyword.
So if you would please do us all a favor and introduce yourself and what you're involved in.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Rubino. For those that don't know me, I wrote a book called The Mold Medic, an Expert's Guide on Mold Removal about 2 years ago. I have a company called Home Cleanse. Andy, you mentioned it. It used to be called All American Restoration. So there's a history of starting a restoration company, realizing that, the general practice of restoration might be missing some things in the scientific realm of and how that bridges between, the science behind it and the health of the occupants, and have really transitioned more into, creating a healthy environment, looking at mold, bacteria, the particles, the toxins they create, how they impact, the living, breathing systems inside of a home, and how do we make sure we're improving this and we can measure that improvement. And, I started a nonprofit called Change the Air Foundation as well, which is just it's a startup. It's in its infancy. It's on year one. And we've already made some tremendous strides there, as well as partnering with the IICRC, the AF, Armed Forces Housing Advocacy Group. And so we're kind of rocking and rolling, trying to help really not only make sure that people are more aware of air quality and the importance of air quality, but trying to make sure that people have access to better air quality, which is a big concern as well. So that's me in a nutshell. How I got into this is a very interesting story, which we can go down if you'd like. But that's the 10,000-foot view.
So yeah, quickly tell us how you got into it, because it's usually very telling about why you do what you do.
Ever since I was a baby, I said I want to remove mold. No, it's my dad's been a restoration contractor since I'm 5 years old. And so I've been around buildings my whole life. He did a lot of fire restoration, which if you know about fire restoration and how fires happen, they get put out with water, and then water is the recipe for mold. So we kind of get into this whole song and dance about how, buildings get restored. And it was really after Hurricane Sandy that happened, because I'm from the Northeast, and it devastated the Northeast. Tons and tons of homes got damaged. And for many, many years thereafter Sandy, I would just get calls, and I would go out, and I was working for my dad at the time, and I'd go out to people's homes, and I'd be listening to this pattern of people not feeling well. I mean, and all kinds of symptoms, from brain fog to chronic fatigue to respiratory stuff to, one woman was even talking about certain cancers she was dealing with that she thought was attributing to her house. There's obviously a lot of evolving medical science around everything that I think we still find new information out every single day. But it was a pattern that I noticed that I didn't have to have all the answers right at that exact moment. I just had to observe that pattern and say, all right, well, what is it about the home that could be contributing to this? And that's where I really started. It just started to evolve and take on a life of its own to the point where, I've helped thousands of people at this point. And, just every single day, I'm trying to figure out how to help more and more people.
Right. And that seems to be the biggest problem right now is how do we find more time in the day for all the folks who need help? And so a lot of the big reason why I do this and why I started this circle community was so that we could just talk with more people, help more people out, hopefully past clients and podcast listeners and so forth, and guests can just share experiences, share some help when they can, really give the ability for all of us to sort of help each other out, lift each other up.
Totally.
Because there's just not enough time in the day for the professionals to do this.
No, you're right. There's only one of me. There's only one of you.
Mhm.
And so we need to build a community of people that want to help other people, that are aligned in, building healthier environments for people that are living inside of these environments, both residentially, commercially. There's some great companies doing it on the commercial side. And there are very expensive products on the commercial side that I was actually just checking out today that are fantastic, but would not be practical for residential. So, it starts there and it kind of moves into that space. We're getting closer than we've ever been, but there certainly needs to be more people aligned on this subject.
Definitely. So one of the questions, actually, I have a lot of questions, and I'm not going to pepper you with my own questions, but hopefully it'll start some discussion here. And I have my own reasons behind this, but I'm really curious to learn your thoughts on this. Mold is everywhere. Mold is inundating us 24/7. Outside of the home, inside of our homes, you're always going to find mold. Why is it that in the last 5 years, this has become the hot button topic? I mean, I feel that mold, the two items, mold damage or mold prevention and formaldehyde and other chemical emissions are this generation's lead and asbestos. And so why do you think we're at that point right now?
Well, I think because I think there's a many different confluence of factors that are at play here. You and I talked about this not too long ago about how in the 1970s, right, the push for energy efficiency really started making tighter buildings. Well, what did that do to the people inside? As you mentioned, we take 20,000 breaths per day. And if the toxins are much more abundant in our environment and there's less airflow to dilute that abundance of toxins, guess what? We're going to have an abundance of toxins coming into our body with every breath that we take. And so that definitely plays a big factor in that. And as you alluded to, we need to really start to look at how do we tackle energy efficiency, but also with the health of the occupants inside at the same time. And that's going to be the path that we need to go down for that route. We also have the remediation industry at large. Unfortunately, it doesn't go thorough enough to really address the root cause of the issues that allow an opportunity for mold or bacteria to thrive inside of a home. And so with that being said, if you think about all of the homes that have been water damaged over the past 20 years, they likely haven't been repaired properly and are still having issues. A good case in point is after Hurricane Sandy. For 7 years after Hurricane Sandy, I was still remediating homes that were supposedly remediated. Wow. And so when you don't do things thoroughly enough, as a whole industry, right, you're putting projects behind you, but those projects are not completed properly, meaning that they're still outstanding, having issues with that, which can cause problems for those living inside. And so we saw a lot of that. As a matter of fact, even to this day, at least 50% of the projects I'm involved in have been already remediated and haven't been addressed properly. And so it's still a pretty alarming number. That is a problem that needs to be solved, that adds to the mix. I also think, people are becoming more aware, right? And it's a hot button issue in the last 5 years because we're seeing some miracles, right? We're seeing people. I know a woman who had a GJ feeding tube installed. She got really sick over 3 years, was bedbound 95% of the time. Within 7 days of moving out of her home, GJ feeding tube's gone. She's walking again. I mean, 7 days, right? And
Wow.
so when people start to hear about these miracles that are happening, it's hard to ignore. I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow just told me the other day, since you fixed my house, I feel like I'm 28 again. I just turned 50. I mean, these are when we see noticeable changes happening. Obviously, it's anecdotal here, but when you start to see a pattern of all these people really transforming their lives and putting certain symptoms behind them due to air quality improvements, it's pretty significant. And that's sort of good news spreads like wildfire, and I think really creates a lot of awareness. So yeah, I think we're seeing a confluence of factors here, but these are good things, right? And it's how do we take the ball from here and continue to move it forward?
It's the general awareness, and I totally agree with what you said. I think that, the stories I hear from clients saying that they've had their home remediated before and now they're going through it again. I mean, that's an everyday occurrence, everyday phone call for us. Why do you think that is? I mean, is there an overall reason why that happens? Is it because the insurance companies just really push their misguided techniques, because it's always one of those things, you follow the money, and so you follow the money to who's giving the dollars. If it's the insurance company, they're dictating what they want done in what procedure, and then the contractor is just like, okay, well, I'll do that, and then they wipe their hands of it.
Yeah, it's quite a few there's quite a few problems there that lead to this. You mentioned insurance. Insurance is one of them. A lot of people don't have adequate coverage. It just boils down to that. I was talking to a couple yesterday. They have $10,000 in mold coverage. Small leak, that's probably enough, and it's no issue. But if you had a pretty severe flood like they had, where there's a lot of walls that need to come out, started top down, of course they have some water damage coverage. But if they have to start removing mold in, let's say, 75% of their exterior walls, it's going to cost more than 10 grand, right? And so now people are strapped. They think they're covered. They're not covered. They're strapped. And they start to let the insurance company influence them a bit and say, look, I got this guy. He can come in and take care of it. It's no problem. And, it's not getting done thoroughly enough. And that's definitely one part of the problem. Reform-wise, we need to have a win-win scenario where, because we don't want insurance companies to go bankrupt, right? We can't say like big bad insurance companies. We're seeing this nightmare in Florida right now, so we don't want them to go bankrupt. But we have to have a win-win product where people get properly covered. So when they do have a mold situation, it can get taken care of properly. I think also we need to have subsidize some sort of revenue stream for the insurance company to be able to make sure that they can cover the extra losses, because you see the writing on the wall. If you follow the history, they used to cover mold up the policy limit, and then you have like the Melinda Ballard case and all these cases where hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in litigation, insurance companies lost a ton of money, and so what do? They make a smart business decision, I would say, to tighten up their biggest expenses. But that smart business decision is also impacting so many people. And the economics of that are far worse than, what they're trying to accomplish. So we have to kind of realign on that. I mentioned the standards themselves. IICRC is an awesome organization. I think that even right now, they're evolving their standards and pushing the ball forward. I've had a chance to review that public document. I was very impressed. Of course, nothing will ever be perfect because you're always going to have many different perspectives into the mix. But I think it's a great leap forward. It's one of the first documents that starts to talk about mycotoxins, right? Toxins produced by mold. When it comes down to this, you have living organisms that are growing inside of a home, whether it's bacteria, whether it's mold, and they're constantly producing particles. They also have the capability of producing toxins. We don't really know why. We know it's a self-defense mechanism, but we don't know how. I've seen papers on, Wi-Fi activity might make mold feel threatened and produce mycotoxins. Maybe spraying bleach and other chemicals that might make mold feel threatened. So we don't know the exact why. We have some theories, but in any case, we can measure them, right? So it's always looking at measuring them and understanding if they're there or not there, as well as they produce spores, right? Bacteria produces spores, mold produces spores. It's kind of like the seed of a plant, if you will, right? It's how it reproduces. But mold's very small, and it colonizes together. Same thing like bacteria. And because it's so small, just taking one breath, you can inhale a lot of it at once. As a matter of fact, it's like 250,000 spores would fit on the head of a pin, just to give people some relative size perspective. And so, when you go outside, every breath you take, you might be breathing in about 1,000 mold spores. And that's with an almost infinite volume of air, right? Inside your home, it could be much worse. You could be breathing in 100,000, 1,000,000, a couple million with each breath you take. And so there is this relativity. The phrase "too much of anything will kill you" it never really held more value than here, because it's the more that you're breathing in, the more that your body has to fight to remove.
Right. All great points. And that kind of brings me to another question then, and that is the testing of a home to determine whether you have a mold problem, whether there's colonization, whether there's mycotoxins, whether there's something you even need to deal with. Because, you and I were involved with Ash Brockington and her husband in that home. And I mean, they buy this home, their dream home, and all the building inspections that have been done were like perfect, great house, great condition. And 2 years into the home, and the entire family is poisoned with mold exposure and leading to so many health issues. Come to find out that the walls are just riddled with mold. And so it was nothing that was seen. It was nothing that they smelled. And even the experts, so-called building inspectors, experts looking around, didn't see any sign whatsoever. Then you get situations where somebody does an ERMI test, gets super high results, zero mold to be found in inspection. And so I guess I'm interested in learning about, your methods, what tests you rely on, whether it's an ERMI test or Hertzsprung test or, dust test and so forth.
Sure.
And, how come some testing shows mold, but they can't find any? Some testing shows no mold, but they're riddled with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's testing is probably the bane of any scientific community's existence, and it's because different tests have different applications where they might be utilized better for something. To give you an example, we're talking about the dust test, ERMI, Hertzsprung. They're all many different names. They're all based around the same technology, and essentially, what they do is they utilize PCR technology. They look at the DNA of what's there, and they measure your dust, and they're basically identifying what's in the dust. That is a great screening tool, meaning you want to answer the question, do I have mold? Do I have bacteria? Do I have toxins? That's a great answer, because if it's in your dust, it's being created somewhere getting into your dust, right? And so that helps with that. Where it's horrible for is telling you where the mold is, right? And so then we go to air testing. Air testing is fantastic if you're testing very close to where you suspect the problem may be. If I test in my living room, and I'm in a hotel right now, by the way, at an event, but if let's say I test right behind me here, which would be this living room, to identify a problem in the backhand corner of the kitchen, well, it's pretty far away.
Yeah.
And you're not going to really get a great representation of the kitchen.
Yeah.
We all learned through COVID that there's like this 6 foot rule, which sometimes 6 feet's even too far. Um, I've seen studies where people took air tests like 1 foot away, 2 foot away, 3 foot away, and 4 foot away from a known problem. Like they identified the problem first, and then they took different air tests of different measurements. And there's no secret. The further away that you got, the less likely you were to think that there was a problem there. And in fact, once you hit about 4 feet away, it looked like less than outside. And so from an air test perspective, which all is microscopy and it's comparative analysis, meaning all you do is compare one sample to an outside baseline sample to make any sort of judgment call as to whether there is or isn't a problem. And I think it's really good as long as you're testing on top of the issue to see, what sort of issue you're dealing with. You can miss a lot of things. I think with air testing, it was the staple of how we identified homes for so long, because it was such an easy, convenient technology. You had this little pump, you loaded up in your trunk, you had little cassettes, you snapped on place, and you could do a whole house taking 3 or 4 samples in less than an hour. You were in and out, you got your samples, you sent them back, and 9 times out of 10 you were telling people, looks great, yeah, everything's fine here. The problem is that you would have to do, let's just say you have 1,000 square foot home, you would have to do a lot of different air samples all across the house, right? Almost as if you were digital printing the home and you wanted to kind of get every little vector of the airspace to really be able to tell someone comfortably that there is nothing wrong with your house utilizing that technology, because it's not a very useful screening tool. And unfortunately, it's been used as a screening tool for a really long time. Matter of fact, somewhere right now in this country, someone is taking 3 air samples of a home right now as a representation of if they do not have a problem.
Right.
And I think, coming back to, we talked a little bit about insurance, talked a little about remediation. This is one area that is very easy to change. It's very easy to move forward. It's going back. There's a lot of amazing technologies today to look at a home. You have thermal imaging, you have moisture readings that you could take. You have air samples where you're just testing closer to the issue. You have the swab surface samples. You have dust testing you can do. I mean, I think it's about looking at all of this. The other thing that I would say about testing that I don't often see, especially if I just get a random report from a client, from someone I've never worked with before, I never see testing of the HVAC system and the coil and all of that. Sometimes we'll do like an air sample again in the center of the room and say, well, no, the HVAC is good because I did an air sample in the center of the room, and if the HVAC was bad, I would have picked it up. And it's like, well, not if you're 40 feet away from the coil, right? I mean, it's really interesting because the evaporator coil constantly condensates. I mean, it is a wet environment, which what is mold and bacteria like? Viruses, wet environments. So it's perfect. It's a perfect environment for these things to grow. None of us really ever have good filtration unless we specifically know. I just worked with a client who had a 12-inch gap between the filter and the actual hole that the filter goes in. So basically, they bought a more expensive filter, but had like a 2-inch pleated media filter before, and then went to like like a 1-inch one, or and anyways, it was, I mean, the filter was going like this inside the cabinet as the air was blowing. So this amazing expensive filter they bought, because it wasn't installed properly, just wasn't even working. Doing nothing. Right?
Yeah.
And you see so many of these stories all the time of people, trying to educate themselves, trying to make good decisions, get the best filtration they can get. But you have, that whole HVAC industry isn't really on board with the technology. And then you have, a lot of hygienists that aren't thinking about the HVAC and how the HVAC might play a part in the quality of air that they're breathing. And so it's a lot to digest, I know, but I'm spitballing all the different things that come to mind, because I think it's really important as we develop a community of how do we help more people live healthier lives. This is all stuff we need to be thinking about.
Honestly, I mean, all these points are totally right there, and so that makes me think again of, you think of somebody like our client Ash and her family. There was no sign of a problem, and so, like you're talking about with testing, it's kind of like if you're doing chemical testing in a room or with a product. I do a test here called a FRAT test, which is a formaldehyde release test. I can tell you within 30 minutes, down to 1 part per billion, how much formaldehyde is coming off of a specific surface. Now, formaldehyde is one of 90,000 chemicals used in the production of building materials. So I can't tell you about how much benzene's in there or how much trichloroethane's in there, or you name the chemical, but I can tell you about formaldehyde, because I'm basically saying I know what I'm testing for, and here's the test for it. If you are doing an air test in a house, just as a, let's say you're interested in buying a home, and I've had a lot of clients over the years who they would hire me just to, page through Zillow listings online with them, and they would ask me to look closely at the pictures to see if there's anything that I should be, or they should be concerned about when they go to do a visual inspection, in person. And then they might even bring a prism test with them and conduct an air test while they're there. The problem is, to your point earlier, if you're 4 feet away from where the problem is, and maybe there is no visible mold anywhere, but they're just generally testing air in rooms, they're really not getting a picture of what this home could be producing.
You're absolutely right. And there's a great question that always comes out of this, right? But Mike, but Andy, if I'm in the center of the room where I spend all my time anyway,
Mm-hmm.
How does that little problem over there that's not traveling more than a couple feet anyway going to impact me, right? I'll just stay away from that corner. Well, there's another equation that we have to discuss, and this is really what drives this fact of people not feeling well. Air moves, and you know what moves with it? Dust.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what becomes a part of our dust? Formaldehyde and mold and bacteria and viruses and fragments of those and toxins of those and
Right.
residues and everything else under the sun that we breathe in, microplastics, right? I mean,
Right.
you talk about it, you name it. Everything that really exists on this planet is going to have some form of particle that can settle within our dust, becoming a part of our dust. And then as that dust circulates around the house, what happens? We're breathing that in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always remind people, we've all sat near a window on a sunny day, and we've all seen that ray of light refract on the dust, where we see, wow, there's a lot of dust here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost crazy the first time that you see it, because your eyes basically adjust to just see through it. Unless the light stops and hits it, you don't even know that it's there, but it is there. And man, when you see that for the first time, you realize how much is actually there that I'm breathing in every time I take a breath. And what is in our dust is very important to know, because the more toxins, the more particles, the more mold, the more bacteria, all this stuff, the more likely we are to have issues with our body as it fights to remove it. And so that's why I tell people it's really important to first identify what organisms are there creating this environment. And this is true if you have your flooring that's off gassing formaldehyde at crazy levels that you're just going to be breathing in. It's like, got to make that hard decision. Do I change floors here?
Right.
And I look at all this stuff and I tell people, I have no idea what improving your air quality will do for you. I can't tell you that it's going to cure X, Y, and Z, because that would be ridiculous. I'm not a doctor. But what I will say is I've seen the most remarkable transformations of people when they look at air quality as part of their holistic health piece. And things from really subtle symptoms like I have so much more energy, I feel younger, I feel more vibrant. Awesome. Quality of life. But for some people, they're, near death's door, they're really, really sick, and all of a sudden, maybe they're not 100% better because that would be unrealistic,
Mhm.
but they're markedly improved, right?
Right.
And I think that's really important because, we're for what I'm trying to do, right? It's bridging the gap between our health and our living environments. There are over 300 medical journals on the topic. I'm not a medical professional, so I don't throw my name in the ring and start to make all these comments. But I'm telling you, my theory is that there's a lot more to the living environment where we spend 90% of our time, where we're taking 20,000 breaths per day, than we think. And people like you are very vital, Andy, because if we're not looking at how do we create healthier homes for people, in the very wise words of Deepak Chopra, he believes if we don't start to make changes in this sector, that our species will go extinct. Now, I know that's a bit dreary here, but I think it just goes to show you that this is the next thing that we need to take serious, and it's these healthy environments.
Well, if looking back at the history of mankind, we've gone from being living in the outdoors to being, being one with the outdoors, to now, after all this time, we're living in shelters, and then we're trying to make these shelters more comfortable. And it's interesting, we're kind of going full circle because, even in the design of our homes, we are introducing more things to sort of bring the outdoors in. We're now asking for more natural light through more windows. We're asking for more fresh air through the use of heat exchange systems. We're bringing in more plants, and we're trying to do more with biomimicry to bring the outdoors in and sort of live this outdoor life inside of a home. But you're right. I mean, it's our environments are getting, for the most part, they're getting worse. I mean, look at before COVID. Before COVID, we were spending 80 to 90% of our lives indoors. COVID hits, and now that number goes up dramatically.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I was thinking about when I asked you that question a while back about what are the causes for people complaining about mold more than before, and I think one of those issues is the fact that because of COVID, one of the silver linings of that dark cloud has been it's forced us all to look at our built environments and to look at it really closely. And, as you say, notice the dust. Don't look through it, but notice it. And then maybe do something about it. We all know that for the most part, dust is about 95% dead human skin cells. Well, okay, what does that turn into, or what does that feed? That's another food source for another organism. And so just because it's something like that doesn't mean it's no big deal. I mean, we definitely have to look at those things. And then I think we're also now, because of people like you and others who are really focusing on the toxicity issue of mold, I think there's a bigger push now from the homeowner level to be concerned about that. Like, should my house smell musty? Should my bathroom smell sort of like a musty sweet smell? No. I mean, all these things are no. But because we're spending more time indoors, and we are a little more health conscious than we were just a few years ago, we're a little more aware of our surroundings, people are starting to ask those questions. And again, because of what you're doing and what others are doing, uh, there are ways to answer these questions that weren't here before, just 5-10 years ago. So we're kind of at that, what I would call it, that perfect storm of having more problems in buildings because of what we've developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years in construction and the use of bad materials and bad methods and so forth. We have people who are more interested in learning about this. We have, for whatever you think about climate change, our climate has been changing for billions of years. It is changing. And because of that, you actually have wetter seasons in areas that didn't always have wet seasons. And so the construction methods that they've used historically in those areas now may not actually be appropriate for what they've been seeing the last 10 years. And we need to adapt to that. And so again, perfect storm of the possibility of problems, the availability of problems, and then the availability of knowledge and ways to fix it. So this is, I guess, if you're in the industry of trying to deal with mold problems, whether you're a remediator, contractor, what have you, this is the time to be alive, I guess.
It is the time to be alive, because you could really be a part of the solution,
Yeah.
and I think it's so important. We have such a good opportunity to help shape our kids' future and our grandkids' future as we continue to move down, the basketball court of society, if you will, because it's usually everybody's kind of prerogative to want to leave the world in a better place than you found it. And building styles have changed. A lot has changed over the past few decades. The way in which we come together now, there's a multi-industrial kind of needing of coming together and figuring this out and solving this problem, I think is gonna be key. We are headed in the right direction, but it's not sustainable currently, and I think that's where we can really start to make some shifts and changes to make things much more sustainable. We talked about not, toxic and the spray foam being toxic, how that can trap moisture behind it. If you have a leak, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. You can't see it because it's not coming through. There are multi problems just in that regard alone to help solve. And air exchange, right? Like people are building homes, and then you're going in and retrofitting things that need to be done to increase ventilation, to increase the health of the home. And it's, as a community, we can all come together and build that way from the start. We can, start to make this the new norm. I love where things are headed, because I know sometimes it sounds very pessimistic. I love where things are headed. And I think if we all stick together and come together as a community of professionals, we can really push things forward. There is a lot of opportunity, for people to make their mark, and for, that change to make a difference for generations to come. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And, I frankly, the amount of people that I talk to on a daily basis that are suffering, it has to stop. It's far too much. These are real problems that people are facing, a lot of which you said earlier, like with ash, you would have never known. I walk in a client's home sometimes, it's immaculate. You would never think there's no signs of water damage, but yet you start to look at the little details and say, let me just check here just in case. Let me just check that just in case. And lo and behold, boom, you find a bigger issue behind the walls, and that's where this can be pretty elusive, because if it's not obvious, then you're looking for subtle signs of how water might be getting in, or how leaks might have happened in the past. Sometimes I'm looking for just a little rusted nail somewhere, right? Just one little rusted nail is the tip of the iceberg, and the whole wall could be completely rotted. And it's looking at that thing and going a little bit deeper and saying, look, this stuff matters. Because I think for a lot of people in our profession, they would have said one rusted nail, no big deal, that's no problem. But yet when you test that rusted nail, when you test behind it, it's an ocean of issues, right? And so we just have to kind of like utilize, some of the technology we have available today that we didn't have 5 years ago, which is something that I love doing. And I think we also need to start to change our mind. And one of the biggest challenges in any professional capacity is you have to realize that it is impossible for you to know everything there is to know about your profession, because there is technology that is yet to be developed
Oh yeah.
Might change your mind 10 years from now. And it's being humble to that.
Yeah, and also understanding that, you are in, you work out of Florida, I work out of Wisconsin. I have customers all over the world. You do as well, and sometimes, quite often, actually, we learn from those customers because the climate is so vastly different, and things are done so much differently in these locations that we have to adjust that even our questions when we're trying to sniff out the root of a problem. So I want to go back to one thing you said was, finding that one rusty nail. I mean, that sure, it's just one rusty nail, but as you said, that could lead to what's going on behind that wall. And so it's being cognizant of those things. And I think of a job that I was working on maybe 10 years ago, a client of mine, brand new construction, wonderful, healthy house for what they could do. And I think they moved in the home during summertime. As of the following summer, so, and probably a few months less than that, they were tearing down the north elevation of the house to rebuild it. And the reason for that is during the siding phase of construction, the siding contractor did not install the flashing around the dryer vents properly. And there was basically moist, drier air pushing into that wall cavity all throughout winter and spring. And then summer comes and they notice moisture on the inside of the wall because obviously all that moisture that was pushed into the walls turned into ice crystals. It all froze. And then by spring and summer, it all melted. And they only noticed the problem actually before that because they got their dryer vents clean because all of a sudden the dryer vent wasn't working properly and it was shutting off the dryer. So they started, doing a snaking down there to try to figure out what the problem was. And they realized, well, that the problem is it doesn't actually go to the outside; it goes in the wall. And so after a small bit of investigation, again, they tear down the wall. The entire north elevation of the home is full of black mold. And so we have to be willing to look at those little things, those little details that may turn into the big problem and catch them early. Because again, even on a brand new home, it could be a problem. And we see this quite often in new homes. Typically, if you're going to have mold in the exterior cavity wall of a home, it's going to happen usually within the first 2 to 3 years of construction because of things like flashing detail issues, because of the fact that the average new home built today has 300 to 500 gallons of moisture in the air and from construction, and it's trying to get out. And as it tries to get out, it gets locked in that cavity wall. And if it is that perfect storm of maybe some mold on the studs, and it's a warm, now damp environment because of that moisture, it can lead to serious problems. And so it is definitely something we got to look at from new construction, that point on, building these homes, not to avoid any mold whatsoever, but to utilize different materials and methods that we know it's not a sustainable food source for mold. It's not a sustainable environment. It's a very simple process, I think, if you do it during construction. It doesn't really cost much at all. And I think this would improve construction tremendously. So I got a couple questions that came through that I want to ask you before we go. One of them was the use of, we're talking about the use of air testing and so forth. What about the new equipment that's out now that actually does real-time testing, basically like putting fishing a little wire through a wall, and it does real-time testing of mold? Have you had much experience with that?
Do you know what type, what company or what type of machine it is? Or
I didn't get a machine type.
okay.
It's probably about a $45,000 piece of equipment.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. It kind of looks like a wand. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
actually met with the founder of that company, and I think it's I think the technology is great.
Okay.
Um, it's if you're gonna do things live like that, obviously, it's in the art of how you're utilizing it in the field, right? And I think that's
Right.
going to be really important. Where are you? Because that wand basically has very expensive sensors on it that help, I guess, scan particles, and then from what I understand, they have an algorithm that
Mm-hmm.
understands that particle and what it may be. So, for
Right.
example, that spore is aspergillus, kind of like how they do in microscopy where they're looking and they're like, that looks like aspergillus, might be
Mm-hmm.
penicillium, we're going to mark that as that, and
Mm-hmm. Right.
so it's kind of a similar basis point here, which is fine. I think it goes to be the same thing. If you're just kind of using it in the center of the room, um, it's not really that helpful. But
Right.
if you're going around and maybe even banging on some walls and sticking it by the bottom of the baseboard and looking at comparing the real time data as you're moving through, I think it could be a very useful tool. It's really just going to be dependent upon how it gets used, and if the person who's using it is really thinking about all the different places that might have issues.
Okay. Thank you. And so I had actually a question that came up from a customer yesterday who she said if she wasn't able to ask it on the stream, if I would ask you for her. Uh, so she has been going through 6 months of remediation. It got to the point now where in the house, she's now looking at a bunch of other things, cabinetry, flooring. We actually replaced the carpet and put in a new wood floor. And she said that everybody in the house instantly feels better. The interesting thing is she did an ERMI test about a month ago. And then she did an ERMI test about 2 weeks ago, which is after the floor was installed. And she said that the ERMI test is higher after the new floor was installed. And my guess was probably during the process of ripping out the carpet, ripping out the carpet pad, a lot of stuff got into the air that was probably there, but maybe not. It didn't show up in the first test. I mean, I guess that makes sense compared to what you just said. You kick up that corner of the room where you weren't testing, and now it's in the air. So does
Yeah.
that make sense that test
Oh
could be
yeah.
higher after?
I would be shocked if it wasn't higher based
Okay.
upon what you said, because you're ripping carpets are like sponges and you're ripping up carpets, and if you've ever done that before, it's not a very easy thing to do, and
Right.
you're pulling and yanking, and it's ripping up, and all those fibers are it's just like a cloud of stuff. And I think yeah, it's very normal for that to go up. It's temporary, right? Because essentially what we're looking at when you do an ERMI is you're looking at how many spores are present of each particular species, and then basically it's divided by however many milligrams of dust that are present. Typically 5 is what they're analyzing, and you go from there. So also, if you clean really thoroughly and test too soon, that also will skew the results, because your previous sample you had 5 milligrams of dust, now you have 1 milligram of dust, and so there's no divisional process that's happening, and so
Sure.
that's why it's really important that when you do any sort of testing, you have similar circumstances so you can compare the baseline data with the
Right.
previous with the after data and really look. What I usually tell people is, after you do any work to your home, remediation, not remediation, I don't whatever you want to call it, you rip up floors, rip up carpets, if you're going to look at testing the dust, right, and you want a good comparative analysis, you test before you touch it, then you do the work, then you clean the home, then you wait about 30 days, and then you test it again,
Okay.
because then it's more acclimated. You're getting a more natural environment that's more comparative to what it was before you stirred all this stuff up. The other thing about ERMI that people have to understand is, even if you hire a mold remediation company and like they're the best, and maybe they're even above a mold remediation company, they're a healthy home company, whatever. But at the point that I want to stick to people is you're going to be moving air, tons of air. They're going to have negative air machines running in rooms. And what is that doing? It's putting that room under negative pressure. What does that mean? It means all the air from all the other rooms is rushing towards that room. That's what that means, right? And so if we look at that from that perspective, oh, okay, so then I might have already had mold or bacteria or toxins in interstitial places across my house that are now being pulled across my house towards that location. So cleaning is so vital after you work on your home, then retest, and that will give you a good indication. And, look, sometimes we do that and they retest and they say, look, there has to be something else somewhere. This mold, for some reason, is not budging, even after you followed all the proper steps.
Right.
And you find like the craziest little problem that just was stopping the home from getting to as healthy as what the objective was.
Man, that is so good. You put it perfectly. It makes me think of customers that'll call up and say, I want to buy a VOC meter off of Amazon so I can, make sure I can monitor my VOCs in the house. And then I'll have to tell them that, well, you realize that you've got to be able to know how to use the equipment, which I think we can everybody has the capacity to learn how to use a piece of equipment.
Sure.
But the thing you don't think about is using it in a method, in a manner that is consistent from day to day to day. It's only as good as the place you put it and the environment it's in. So I had a customer a while back who had one of these VOC meters, and actually they actually did a test. They bought a home air quality test, and they got the results back and said that their VOCs were spiked to just massive amounts, and they couldn't understand why. We went through all the different things that could have happened. Come to find out that he's a diabetic, and during the testing, because he didn't even think of it, it's just a daily thing, he took an insulin shot. Well, what do you do before you take a shot? You take a cotton swab with alcohol and you sanitize the skin. That cotton swab with alcohol spiked the VOC meter, even though it wasn't in the same room, but air movement took it there. And so the same thing happens if you cook, if you put on perfume, if somebody walks in the house and they just walk through somebody else's cigarette exhaust. All these things can skew a test. And so if somebody walks around with a VOC meter and they say, oh, today it's really high, tomorrow it's really low, what's going on? Chances are it has nothing to do with the meter or the house itself. It's something else that's going on. But it takes a professional, I believe, who is trained to write these things down. If you're doing testing, I learned this years ago when I was involved in commercial construction and architecture. If there's a problem on a job site with, let's say, hardwood flooring, you have to go in there and test the moisture content of the subfloor, the moisture content of the wood, what's the humidity in the air, what's the temperature, and then you have to test those things on a daily basis throughout the entire process of installation, because then with that information you can look back, and if the wood floor is cupping or curling 6 months later, you can look at those test results and say, well, during installation, here's your problem. You didn't let the wood acclimate. And so as soon as the wood hit the subfloor, it swelled up because of the 10% increase in moisture content. And so it's only as good as all those things you can document and look for. Just seeing a number on a VOC meter, on a Hermie test, isn't as important as how it was derived. If it was actually given to us in a manner that it makes sense and it can be documented.
You know why you're so good, Andy?
No.
Because you've run into all those situations before. You know exactly what happens when certain things appear a certain way. And that's what experience does. That's what professionalism does. And people can buy meters and buy things on their own volition these days, and it'll be there in 2 days via Amazon, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But the reality of the situation becomes that situational experience that you gain along the way provides a ton of value, because you're skipping the line essentially of all the things that could go wrong that you have to troubleshoot along the path to try to figure out what's going on. You skip that because you have somebody that already has been through a ton of the circumstances that might happen and already has a fix and plan for that. I think that's why I've built a good name for myself and helping people. It's because for 11 years, I solely went after the most sensitive people in the space and said, I want to help you. I don't care what it takes. I'll figure it out. I'm your guy. And my philosophy was, if I can help the sickest, most sensitive person create a healthy environment and remove mold and bacteria and all the things, then I can help anybody, right? Because you start there and you really figure out everything that you need to figure out along that path. But I can tell people when people clean 3 times and there's still an issue and the ERMI's still not where they want it to be, I can tell you what it is. Tell exactly what it is, because I've been there 100 times, and I've seen 100 times, 100 different things that have happened and have prevented it from getting to where we wanted it to go. So much so where I'm like, guys, I'll tell you, this is what it is. We find it, we fix it, eureka, everything's fixed, everyone's happy, and they move on. Whereas some people might just go, I don't know. I've done everything I could. This test must not be valid. This doesn't work. And so, it's just people rolling up their sleeves and getting it done, which is something that we've done. And you don't get that when you try to do things yourself. There is a value in asking for help from somebody who really cares and knows this stuff, is why I think this community that is so desperately needed, of people that can come together and share their stories and help push things forward, is going to be really key.
Fabulous. You and I could probably talk for another 2 hours, Michael. But I know you're at a conference and we're coming up on an hour here. So first of all, folks, Michael is part of our community. He's part of the non-toxic environment circle community. I'm certainly not going to tell you that he will be here every day to answer your questions, but he is here. And so if something comes up and we have a discussion, and certainly, Michael can chime in, he will. More so, where can folks find you? And I know you've got some events coming up, so please give us a plug.
Yeah, so there are many websites for me these days. So the best way to find me, social media, Michael Rubino, themichaelrubino.com, has all the stuff on there. The book I talked about is called The Mold Medic, an Expert's Guide on Mold Removal. There is homecleanse.com if you're in need of the service aspect of, creating a healthy environment. Pairs great with what Andy does, because he gives us the plan. We take things a step further on the air quality side and do our thing, and it's a dream come true on that side of things. And then we have Change the Air Foundation, which is our nonprofit, and it is about making air quality more accessible. Many of you listening probably know the costs involved with going the extra mile and creating a healthy environment. And there are a lot of people out there that cannot afford that at all. And so it's about bridging that gap. And there's some reform and things that we're working on with our government and the great states of our nation. And so we're looking to help move that needle forward on that front. And that pretty much sums it up. And of course, I'm on Circle now here. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's been absolutely a pleasure to have you. And anything that any events that Michael is going to be involved with, we'll certainly put links to here in the Circle community, because I think it's a definite must watch, must listen to, and hope to have you back on the show in the future. And good luck at your conference.
Thank you so much. And yes, if they demand more, we will give them more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. This will be posted to the page shortly. Take care, everyone.
Take care.